In the middle of Nevada's dry and desolate Great Basin desert, there's a small cave hiding an enormous secret. This is Spirit Cave, and buried deep in its darkness, someone made a discovery that would eventually change everything we thought we knew about the history of humans on this continent. It all began in 1940. A husband and wife archaeological team, Sydney and Georgia Wheeler, were out surveying the region on behalf of the Nevada State Parks Commission. Their main goal was to protect historical sites from the rising threat of guano mining. But during their survey of Spirit Cave, they stumbled upon something extraordinary. Beneath layers of tightly woven mats made from tool reeds, they uncovered human remains. One set belonged to a middle-aged man, probably in his 40s, whose head and right shoulder were astonishingly well preserved by the desert's dry climate. But even more intriguing than the body itself was the way he had been buried, wrapped carefully in tool matting, wearing finely crafted lined moccasins, and covered with a rabbit skin blanket. Other woven textiles were also found nearby, clear signs of a highly skilled culture whose craftsmanship wouldn't be seen again in that region for thousands of years. With the help of local residents, the Wheelers carefully recovered 67 artifacts from the site. Everything was transported to the Nevada State Museum in Carson City. Since carbon dating didn't yet exist, researchers had to estimate the age of the remains based on the style and complexity of the grave goods. Their conclusion? Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years old. It was an impressive find, but nothing that shook up the field of archaeology. And so, the remains were stored away, a report was written, and for more than half a century, nothing happened. But to truly grasp the importance of this individual, we have to rewind more than 10,000 years. Back when this man was alive, the Great Basin looked nothing like it does today. What is now barren desert was once the lush shoreline of a massive Ice Age lake known as Lake La Hontan. Early communities didn't wander through wastelands. They thrived beside that ancient freshwater sea. Fish were abundant, birds filled the sky, and wild plants offered food and materials. Life was rich. These weren't aimless nomads. They were skilled people shaped by the rhythm of the lake. Fast forward to the 1990s. Archaeology had made huge strides. New tools, new methods, especially accelerated mass spectrometry radiocarbon dating, allowed researchers to re-examine old collections with fresh eyes. Spirit Cave's forgotten mummy was among the specimens chosen for testing. And the results? They blew the lid off everything. This wasn't a 2,000-year-old man. He was more than 10,600 years old, calibrated, precise, undeniable. In that instant, Spirit Caveman wasn't just another mummy. He became the oldest human mummy ever found in North America. And not just that. He predated Egypt's pyramids by over 5,000 years and lived more than 2 millennia before Europe's famous Iceman, Ötzi. And with that one test, the entire timeline of human history in the Americas began to crack wide open. This discovery wasn't just historic, it was revolutionary. The Spirit Caveman instantly became a challenge to everything archaeologists had believed about how and when people first arrived in the Americas. For decades, the dominant theory went something like this. During the last ice age, humans crossed a land bridge, Beringia, that once connected Siberia and Alaska. These early people, known as the Clovis culture, were believed to have arrived around 12,000 years ago. Their presence was mostly identified by distinctive fluted spear points found across North America. According to the textbooks, they were the first. But now, here was the Spirit Caveman, buried in Nevada, dressed with care, clearly part of a complex culture, and he was just as old, if not older, than the Clovis people. That shook the foundation. Was it possible that people had arrived earlier than we thought? Maybe even by a different route. Some scientists proposed that early humans could have traveled along the Pacific coastline by boat, navigating the edge of the ice. Others went even further, reviving controversial ideas about early crossings from Europe across the Atlantic. All of a sudden, the story of the peopling of the Americas was no longer simple and linear. It was complicated, layered, and open to new possibilities. But this wasn't just a scientific mystery. It quickly turned into something much deeper and more emotional. You see, Spirit Cave sits on public land, which means the remains fell under the authority of the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM. As scientists pressed for more advanced testing, including DNA analysis, their efforts triggered a powerful response. The Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe, whose ancestral territory includes the Spirit Cave area, stepped forward. To them, this wasn't just a scientific specimen, this was an ancestor. Their oral traditions spoke of a spiritual connection to that land that stretched back farther than memory. And from their perspective, disturbing the remains of a relative, especially for analysis, was a violation of both cultural values and spiritual beliefs. This brought the case directly under the scope of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Passed in 1990, this federal law requires that human remains and cultural items be returned to Native tribes if a cultural link can be reasonably established. The Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe made it clear. They wanted the remains returned, and they did not want further testing, especially DNA sequencing, performed. They viewed it as a desecration. But on the other side, scientists argued that the Spirit Caveman was too important to ignore. Studying him could unlock critical answers about early human migration, genetic ancestry, and the broader story of how we came to populate the Western Hemisphere. They also pointed to his distinct physical features, which some researchers claimed looked different from modern Native Americans. To them, this suggested he might have belonged to an earlier, perhaps unrelated population. And so began a 20-year standoff, a battle between spiritual belief and scientific inquiry, between tradition and technology. But eventually, after years of tension, something changed. In 2015, a breakthrough was reached. After long conversations, careful negotiation, and the building of mutual trust, the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe made a remarkable decision. They agreed to allow one final test, a full DNA analysis of the Spirit Caveman's genome. It was a moment of trust and risk for both sides. The work was undertaken by a team led by Professor Eske Willerslev, an evolutionary geneticist from the University of Cambridge and the University of Copenhagen. Using the latest techniques, they sequenced the Spirit Caveman's entire genome, and the results were conclusive. The Spirit Caveman, this 10,600-year-old individual, was genetically related to present-day Native Americans. Even more specifically, he shared direct ancestral ties to the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe itself. Science and tradition had converged. For the tribe, the result confirmed what their oral histories had always taught them, that they were part of this land not just for hundreds or thousands of years, but for 10 millennia or more. With the genetic evidence in place, the legal path was finally clear. In 2016, the Bureau of Land Management officially approved the repatriation of the Spirit Caveman's remains to the tribe. And in 2018, nearly 80 years after he was first uncovered, he was finally laid to rest again, in a private ceremony led by his descendants. After over 10,000 years, he returned home. The repatriation of the Spirit Caveman wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moment of healing, a bridge between the past and present, between science and spirit. For the Fallon Paiute Shoshone people, it was a sacred act, finally giving rest to an ancestor who had waited thousands of years. And for the scientific community, it was a profound reminder that knowledge doesn't always come from a microscope or a genome sequencer. Sometimes it comes from listening, to stories, to tradition, to people who have lived on the land for generations. But that doesn't mean the Spirit Caveman's story ends there. In fact, it only deepens. His discovery did more than add a data point to archaeology. It forced a rewrite of the timeline. If people were living in Nevada over 10,600 years ago, then the Clovis First model no longer held water. That model, The idea that the Clovis culture represented the first humans to enter North America had already been under pressure from other sites. But the spirit caveman was different. He wasn't just a tool or a footprint. He was a person, preserved, complex, and unmistakably human. And unlike the stone tools of Clovis or the bones found in older settlements, this mummy had something more: a face, a burial, a story. His deliberate placement in the cave, wrapped in mats, adorned with carefully crafted items, it all pointed to a people who weren't simply surviving in a harsh landscape. They were thriving, thinking, feeling. They had culture, ceremony, respect for the dead. That challenges the way we often think about ancient people. Too often, early humans are portrayed as primitive or barely hanging on. But Spirit Cave tells a different story. It shows us that 10,000 years ago, there were already established traditions, craftsmanship, and care in the way communities honored their dead. And the implications go even further. Think about it. If this man lived 10,600 years ago in what is now Nevada, what does that say about how long humans had been in the Americas before that? It suggests a much earlier arrival, possibly thousands of years before the Clovis culture. And if people were already crafting complex clothing, blankets, and ceremonial burials in the Great Basin, then their ancestors must have had time to migrate, adapt, and evolve those skills over generations. In other words, by the time the spirit caveman was buried, humans had already been here for a long, long time. This also reopens questions about how people migrated. Was it a single wave from Siberia, or were there multiple migrations over time? Could some early groups have come by boat, following the coastline southward? Or did different populations arrive from entirely different parts of the world? Suddenly, the peopling of the Americas is no longer a straight line. It's a web, a puzzle made up of many cultures, many journeys, and many forgotten chapters. And one of the most remarkable things about Spirit Cave is how he connects those threads. Not just in terms of age, but in what he represents. He is, in a way, North America's version of Otzi, the Iceman, a body preserved so well that it opens a window into another world. A rare biological time capsule that captures not just bones or DNA, but the choices, tools, and beliefs of an ancient people. But while Otzi helped us understand Copper Age Europe, the Spirit Caveman did something even more seismic. He pushed back the origin story of an entire continent. Before this discovery, many scholars considered indigenous presence in the Americas as relatively recent, measured in a few thousand years. But now we have a face, a name, a timeline, and proof of deep roots stretching beyond 10,000 years. And that changes everything, because it's not just about when humans arrived, it's about how long they have belonged. When you really think about it, the story of the Spirit Caveman isn't just about bones in a desert cave. It's about how we tell stories, about who gets to define history and who's been left out of it for far too long. For generations, archaeology in the Americas was dominated by a narrative that focused on migration into the continent, not within it. The question was always, when did humans get here? But discoveries like this force us to shift the question to something far more powerful. How long have humans been here, and what lives did they build? Because this wasn't just a burial, it was a deliberate, careful ceremony. Someone wrapped him with care. Someone placed those moccasins on his feet. Someone wove that rabbit skin blanket. That kind of attention speaks to love, to ritual, to community. And we have to remember, this wasn't a man isolated in time. He was part of a network of people, a society that had adapted to a unique and challenging environment. These weren't wanderers passing through. They lived, they created, they remembered, and that's why the battle for his repatriation was so important. For the Falin Paiute Shoshone tribe, this wasn't about blocking science. It was about dignity. It was about recognizing that these ancient remains weren't just data points or research opportunities. They were ancestors, family. part of a sacred story that stretches back farther than any carbon test could ever tell. The fact that DNA eventually confirmed the spirit caveman's connection to the tribe wasn't a surprise to them. They didn't need scientific validation. Their stories, passed down for countless generations, had always told them they belonged to that land. But what's remarkable is that in the end, science didn't contradict those stories. It affirmed them. That moment, when genetics and oral history aligned, was powerful. It was a reminder that knowledge doesn't always come from a lab. It can come from memory, from tradition, from the quiet knowing that comes from living on and with the land for thousands of years. And maybe that is one of the biggest lessons the spirit caveman leaves us with. That truth lives in more than one place. That sometimes the past speaks through DNA, and other times it speaks through story. As researchers continue to explore early human settlements across the Americas, the Spirit Cave discovery remains a pivotal landmark, not just because of how old the remains are, but because of what they represent: the presence of fully human lives, complete with emotion, culture, and connection. He wasn't just surviving, he was part of a thriving people. That understanding is reshaping how we view ancient history, especially in North America. No longer are early humans seen as mere migrants chasing herds across frozen tundras. Instead, they're seen as builders of tradition, guardians of memory, and members of civilizations that left behind more than stone tools. They left behind relationships, rituals, and a legacy that continues to echo today. And perhaps what's most humbling is this. For decades, the spirit caveman was tucked away in a museum drawer, a quiet secret from a forgotten excavation. It wasn't until modern science, respectful dialogue, and ancient tradition came together that his voice could finally be heard again. He waited over 10,000 years for that moment, and now the world is listening. The Spirit Caveman's story is more than a historical breakthrough. It is a story about time, silence, and rediscovery. He reminds us that the past isn't gone, it's just buried, waiting for us to listen more closely. And sometimes all it takes is a single discovery to shift the foundations of what we thought we knew. Before his unearthing, most scholars believed that indigenous history in North America only stretched back 12,000 or maybe 13,000 years. That was the widely accepted model: simple, neat, comfortable. But the Spirit Caveman cracked that story wide open. His existence, dated to more than 10,600 years ago, adds undeniable evidence to a far deeper, richer, and more ancient human presence in North America. He lived in a time when Ice Age lakes still shimmered across Nevada, when lush wetlands sustained thriving communities, and when humans were crafting not just tools, but textiles, clothing, and ceremonial traditions. And he wasn't alone. His burial shows intention. His clothing shows care. His placement within the cave wasn't random. It was a ritual act, carried out by people who understood memory, mourning, and meaning. That's what makes him more than a mummy. He's a messenger, a time traveler from the Pleistocene who somehow survived to whisper across the millennia. And what he tells us is clear. Human history in the Americas didn't begin with the Clovis people or with the arrival of Europeans. It began long before in places like Spirit Cave, where ancient hands wove mats, stitched moccasins, and honored their dead with dignity. For archaeologists, anthropologists, and indigenous communities, the Spirit Caveman is now a symbol, a reminder of how easily we underestimate the depth of history, and how often we ignore the wisdom of those who were here first. In the end, he went from being a forgotten relic tucked in museum storage to becoming one of the most important ancient individuals ever found on this continent. And thanks to science, tribal leadership, and the willingness to seek truth from multiple sources, his journey came full circle. He was finally returned home, laid to rest in private by his people, a ceremony the public never saw and never should have. It wasn't meant for us. It was meant for him and for them. But even though he now sleeps again beneath the soil of his ancestors, the ripple effects of his discovery continue to spread. Because every time we ask, who were the first people here? His presence answers quietly, we were. And every time someone assumes that native history is recent, or secondary, or optional, the spirit caveman pushes back, firmly, silently, with 10,000 years of presence behind him. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of archaeology's most powerful stories. If you found it meaningful, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you never miss another exploration into history's mysteries. And let us know in the comments, do you think there are even older remains still out there, waiting to be discovered? Or have we just begun scratching the surface of our deepest origins?